Hello, Hidden Gems. I am so happy to be here for a Hidden Hour because it has been a couple of weeks and I feel like it's a date night with my co host and partner in crime, Dr. John Matthias, who is also close to me. We were just together, but he went into the his separate office so that we could do our split screen. By the way, we do have dreams for a studio one day where we can be sitting on a couch, but
Yeah,
right right now this is
yeah.
easiest, and it's still fun though to be able to be with you. I'm so glad to be home for Mother's Day, babe. Um,
We're happy to have you. I'm so glad you're here.
yeah, and
Makes
I'm
makes all the difference having you home. So thank you for coming back, and thank you. You're doing an amazing job in Idaho. I'm really impressed. So thank you for all the hard work you're doing up there too. But we're glad to have you home for Mother's Day and to celebrate everything you mean to this family and how important you are and how much we've missed you. So
thank
thank you
you.
for coming back.
Well, we have all missed you, and I'm so glad that I can be back and ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
I,
Yep.
I I wanted to share with all of you. John and I wanted to have a bit of a lighter night tonight because it has been so heavy. And per my request for Mother's Day, I thought, you know what, John, as far as this hidden hour, this is date night for us, and with all of our gems, let's keep it light tonight. Let's have fun tonight. And if that's okay with all of you, the trial is heavy, and we are going to take a break with all of you and laugh and talk the James and Elena text thread, also known as the Loin Fire text thread or the love story text thread. And I get to ask John my burning questions about Chad Daybell in court, if that's okay. And
Yeah, the text thread, by the way, like kudos to everyone in court for keeping a straight face, because I don't know, I don't know how I would be able to keep a straight face if I was on the stand reading that text thread, the Loin Fire text thread. It would be very difficult knowing that middle aged middle aged people were writing that stuff, well, specifically Chad, um, and being completely serious about it. It's something to behold, but we'll
how,
behold it tonight.
how Not to Sext by Chad Daybell.
Yeah, we could call it that too.
Because I have what I call the courtroom cough too, because it's where everybody has it. One thing that we just thought this would be fun. One thing that's on the agenda tonight, after I asked John my few questions, is, and here's the backstory. Hold on, this cough. The backstory is the Loin Fire James and Elena love story text thread actually appeared the beginning of October 2021. And the day it came down, I was pouring through the Chandler, Arizona document dump. It was a huge day in the Chad Daybell trial, a really big day, thousands of pages, things we've never seen, shocking evidence. And tucked in all of these thousands of pages was the love story by Chad Daybell about how he met Lori Vallow. And I thought, I've got to read this to John. So I read through it. And the next day I said, John, sit down. I'm not going to tell you what this is, but I'm going to read something to you. And that is what we did. And we posted it on Patreon, our Patreon account. We actually have 70 episodes, 72 episodes now. Did you know that, babe? You should feel proud. 72 Patreon only episodes on our Patreon for our Patreon members. And this is one of them. So we're going to share it with the public tonight as well. So you guys will be able to go back in the day and witness John, or listen to John hearing it for the first time, his initial reaction. Dr. John reacts. And the best part about it is I don't think, John, you've heard this since that night 3 or 4 years
No.
ago. So you're going to react tonight and remember everything that happened in that.
And let me, not only was I hearing it for the first time, but I should say that because it was on Patreon, it was probably pretty informal, but I don't remember it that well. I mean, I've obviously thought about that text thread and what it means psychologically, but I I presume because it was on Patreon that it was a little more casual than we typically are, but I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess
As we
I'll
say,
I'll
Patreon,
remember tonight. Yeah.
things we don't dare say unless we're behind a paywall, right? So, yeah,
Right. Yeah.
you might get a little red faced. You haven't listened to it. I actually haven't listened to it in a couple of years either. But I will tell you this: one person that listened to it was the Dateline producer, Shane Bishop, who ended up calling us, and we appeared on Dateline. And I think what inspired him was this Patreon episode. So we've had a few memorable Patreon members in the past. Dateline, John Glatt, the author, and a few others. And we are grateful for all our Patreon members. And then this is going to be a really long date night. So I'm going to ask John a couple of burning questions about Chad. We're going to get to the Loin Fire love story. Dr. John reacts. And then after tonight, we're going to go do intimate Q&A on our Patreon account. So for all of you that are on our Patreon, Jessica, thank you. Thank you so much. With drunken noodles listening to James and Elaine episode. True story. I did not mean to pin T Diva's text, but I'm glad I did. I meant to say thank you for Jessica, but that was meant to be. Yeah, I think we were eating Domino's, and I know that because I actually did a sound check on our episode, and I skipped the first part where we mentioned we're eating Domino's, but now you heard it.
That I don't remember, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay. Couple of questions before we get to that.
Okay.
Here's what's going on in court. I need to talk to you about Chad Daybell's hands and the story behind the hands. No, bear with me here. The story behind the hands is this. I'm in court. I'm noticing Chad Daybell's hands. They're strange. I don't want to be too petty. I'm not bringing them up on my lunch live. I'm trying to still be a formal reporter. Like, we can leave the hands alone. But every day I start to notice the hands more and more and more. And so to the point where I've been talking about them quite a bit on my lunch live. So here's where we are. First off, there's a couple things to them. The way they look. Chad's hands are very pretty, I might say. Like they're actually kind of feminine. They're a little bit smaller. They look like 20 years younger than my hands do. They're I'm a little bit far away, so I can't for sure guarantee that he could be a hand model, but like they are definitely like, he's taking care of his hands. I don't know if he's doing gloves at night or what, but he's got some great hands.
Is he getting manicures in prison, in jail? Is that would be the
I doubt it.
first time I've heard of that.
Sunlight. They probably haven't seen a lot of sunlight. But
maybe that too. But maybe he has a lot on his I forget what the prison accounts are called. He has a lot on his prison account, a lot of money.
The Rowdy Owl said it. I didn't. You can see it there on screen.
Yeah. So
But here's the next thing. This is what I've got to do. And it's hard to show people on my lunch live because I'm holding my phone with one hand. And so it's hard to kind of show this. So let me show you. His hands are often clasped. He's very formal. They're often clasped. You know me, like I have a nervous habit. My hands are everywhere. I'm a loud talker with my hands. I grab them. I sit on them. I touch my face. Everyone yells at me because it's my nervous habit. Chad has his hands clasped, but then he'll do this. And you also have to realize Chad is sort of like a ballerina with his hands. Like they are the most graceful movements. Like he never just folds them or clasps them. It's like this. And then he'll go like this. He does the temple steeple thing. And then he'll sit like this. But they're usually on his desk, I want to point out. I'm raising mine to show you. And then he'll rest them on the desk. I can't really show you, but, well, maybe I can. Hold on. I am using my computer camera today because all my stuff. So he'll rest them on the desk like this. And then sometimes he'll be like this, just barely touching. And then he'll go like this. And then he'll go like this. And there's no fast motion. And then he'll go like this. And then he does have a nervous habit of touching his pen and straightening his desk. He's very particular about how things are rested on his desk. And then he'll scroll his computer all the time, to the point
Mhm.
where if he did it once every so often, I would think he was scrolling his computer to look at evidence, but he scrolls all the time. And then, um, depending on the witness, sometimes he's a little bit more relaxed and we've seen him move a little bit more. But if it's a witness he doesn't really like or he's not liking what the witness is saying, his shifty eyes come back a lot. Are you taking notes? I love this. You taking notes on what I'm saying? You picking up what I'm putting
Yeah,
down?
a little bit. Yes,
Okay.
I'm taking a few notes.
And he has these shifty eyes where so if it's a witness, he's not like feeling like he's not too happy, he moves his eyes more than his head. If he's a little bit more relaxed, he'll move his head more. But like this last week, all these testimonies going down, they're really intense. He does the shifty eyes a lot. And then very, very little expression. Very little expression. Even Heather Daybell testified at how little expression. In fact, they asked her, well, how did Chad Daybell react when you said you didn't believe him? And she's like, well, he doesn't really show expression. Although I do admit that when three women were testifying that were Tammy Daybell's coworkers last week, Pam and Tammy and Janet, I felt he looked angry, but he had these pursed lips and he was trying not to. Sometimes I feel like he tries to look sad and he doesn't. But for the most part, I would say we all kind of agree that he looks expressionless. When he's really feeling something, he'll shake his head. Like when he looked at JJ's pictures, oh, just like a head shake. He's not crying, just going, and his lips are like this all the
Right.
time.
Yeah, I've
And
seen those.
then you've seen the lips. And then when one of the women said that Tammy Daybell had lost weight recently, he just shakes his head. And then he'll often, like, he refused to look at Kay Woodcock for a long time, refused to look at Heather Daybell for a long time. So there's some things, I don't know what catches your mind and your psychologist brain, but I think a lot of us want to know what in the world Chad Daybell or what that means about Chad Daybell, this guy, this expressionless slug on the stand. I didn't call him Slug. The jailers nicknamed him Slug where he is. So I can't say I disagree, but
So I think what you're generally describing would be a series of defense mechanisms that let me back up. So this will be a little more serious than if we want this whole night to be kind of humorous, this is going to be a little more serious. But this let me back up to kind of a classic Freudian idea, which is that the mind is perpetually in conflict. So this is one of Freud's fundamental ideas, and which, by the way, has been consistently proven to be accurate through cognitive neuroscience. There's in fact, I would refer people to an article called "The Scientific Legacy of Sigmund Freud" by Drew Weston. Weston is Westen, where Weston talks about contemporary studies that actually show that a lot of many of Freud's fundamental ideas have been supported by current neuroscience, and this is one of them. And the idea here is that the mind is sort of like a parallel distributing processing mechanism, which means that in a computer doesn't just operate at one level. There's multiple mechanisms going on at the same time. And that's sort of how the mind works, that you have elements of the mind that are conscious and paying attention to the current environment, and then you have parts of the mind that are more unconscious, that rely on memory and things that we don't necessarily know. And so the mind is often, almost all of us, we have conflicted goals and conflicted motivations, and very rarely you will find someone that is completely aligned in terms of their views of the world and their goals and their desires. And so the basic Freudian idea is that the mind is often very conflicted, and because of that, because we're always in conflict to some degree, we all have anxiety. So that's another fundamental idea. So from conflict you get anxiety, and because anxiety to most of us is difficult to deal with, we find ways to defend against it so we can function. So that's where the Freudian idea of repression comes in. So anxiety gets repressed, or in some cases suppressed, and oftentimes we need to do that to cope with the world and to function at a reasonable level. And so let's think about Chad's hands in the context of a mind in conflict. You have someone who thinks he's a prophet, and he's being charged and tried for the murder of multiple people, including 2 children. Right? That's going to, in and of itself, for any of us, that would generate a tremendous amount of conflict. So you have someone who is already in a position where they're completely divided, right? In terms of they're sitting in a court being forced to deal with evidence that they don't believe is true, that's not consistent with how they view themselves. And so they're having to confront this enormous amount of anxiety, like an unusual amount of anxiety and stress. And so in that sense, it might be similar to OCD or some anxiety disorders where we develop patterns or habits to cope as a defense mechanism to cope with that anxiety. So the hands, I think you can see the hands. You talked about his desk being particularly neat and orderly, right? That would be consistent with that type of presentation. I'm not saying he has OCD, but when anxiety becomes too overwhelming and it breaks through our basic defense mechanisms, in other words, just our general attempts to put our anxiety aside so we can function, that's when you start getting into psychopathology. So when anxiety becomes too intense, that's when you go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or you get on meds, right? There's different ways that we have to manage our anxiety if we want to be able to function. And once it becomes too overwhelming, we have to find another way to manage that anxiety. And so I think the hands, the way you describe this, I think the hands should be seen in the context of it could be seen as a compulsive behavior. So obsessive compulsive is, for example, you have certain thoughts that are obsessive. For example, you think that the germs are invading you all the time. And so when you touch something, you wash your hands repeatedly. So you have the thought and then you have the behavior. And the behavior is the way to discharge the anxiety. So Chad, I don't know, so whatever his thoughts are in court, maybe his thoughts are, he's innocent, that he's a prophet, that everybody's getting this wrong, whatever it is, whatever his anxious thoughts are, he's resorting to certain behaviors like his hands to try to annul or reduce that anxiety. So it could be part of a ritual, almost kind of an OCD ritual, where he's trying to negate this anxiety or at least put it aside enough so that it doesn't overwhelm him. Because if it overwhelms him, he's not going to be able to sit there and cope with what's going on. Or it's going to come through in way he could get angry, or he could say something, or he could mutter things to the judge under his breath in court, right? Like once that anxiety starts coming through too forcefully, then he's in trouble, and the jury will see that. So I think he's really, it's to me, it can be kind of a ritual. And it's almost certainly to me a way of coping with his anxiety. So that's one interpretation. If you want to go for kind of a classic Freudian interpretation, and this this interpretation is going to be a little more humorous, because I'm not going to take it fully seriously, but I'm going to throw it out there because it might be more consistent with kind of our theme tonight. But for, again, getting back to kind of classic Freudian ideas that are less credible than the mind in conflict, one of those would be kind of his psychosexual stages. And in his psychosexual stages, and one of the stages, for example, is the oral stage, where the mouth and sucking become kind of predominant features of that stage. And so Freud might say that people that smoke a lot, for example, might be fixated in the oral stage, right? And so there's another stage of his that that would have more to do with the hands. And so I can't hear, are you,
Okay,
are
I'm
you,
listening.
oh,
I'm
there you
listening.
go. Okay.
Go on.
Your mic was off. And so, and again, this is pure speculation. I'm having some fun with this, but let's say it has to do with more of a developmental stage. And again, these are less established Freudian ideas, but, there could be, I'm trying to put this in a way that's more G-rated. There could be a bit of an autoerotic type quality to his hands, to what he's doing.
Okay.
If you
Okay.
catch my drift, like there's certain
Yeah.
words I can't use here because of YouTube, but
Mhm.
there could be more, right? So you could have more of kind of his hands would represent an attempt at self-soothing.
Hmm.
That it's not only this OCD ritual potentially, but there's almost this autoerotic kind of self-soothing quality, and the goal in each case is to reduce his anxiety.
Huh. Interesting.
So either way, I think any way you look at this, the hands are definitely an attempt to cope with this overwhelming anxiety. You mentioned that he's expressionless, that he doesn't show a lot of emotions. That too would be consistent with defense mechanisms. That, for example, this idea of control. We know we've talked about this on our podcast that Chad is very concerned with control and kind of maintaining control of the narrative, maintaining control of his books, his life, Tammy, his deceased wife, right? It's a big part of his life. And one element of control would be trying to control unbearable emotions. So emotions that start breaking through our defense mechanisms, like anxiety, like fear, like sadness. There's certain negative emotions, we call them distress emotions, that can be overpowering to a lot of us. But somebody like Chad in particular, that's very focused on control, control becomes a defense mechanism as an attempt to negate or repress unbearable emotions. So I think you have that element here too.
Yeah, I liked this comment by Rowan. You
Okay.
control what you can control, whether it's a pencil or a wife.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, and so this issue of control becomes pathological when you start losing sight of the limits of that control. So in that example, right, when you have your desk in front of you in court, you can control the pencil, you can control the computer, you control whatever's in your reach. But it becomes more difficult when you start talking about other human beings and controlling wives and kids and right and neighbors. That's when you're reaching a little bit. And I think, and when you start reaching too much, when you start controlling everyone in your environment, then it becomes pathological. So, and you have different types of control too. You have, most of us want to control our environment. That's how we survive. So control is normal, but it becomes pathological when it starts extending beyond the reach of what we should normally be able to control. And then it becomes coercive when we start becoming abusive or manipulative or violent, when we start trying to control our environment in really unhealthy ways, like through violence. That's when it becomes coercive. So I would say pathological control, which is kind of in the middle, is more of a defense mechanism, and coercive control is when you've thrown out all attempts to manage your life, or to deal with anxiety, or to kind of you've gone beyond the limits of normal control, and now you're going into the terrain of violence and manipulation and very unhealthy ways of controlling.
Wow. Thank you. It's incredible how much I learn from you every time. Here's a question from Shy Gal. She asks, Dr. John, if he is sociopathic, would he still have emotion?
Yeah, so that's something we talk about a lot. There is a researcher by the name of James Blair who's done some of the really excellent research on showing that psychopaths or sociopaths do not experience emotion the same way normal people do. They're just not hardwired to feel and express emotions the way normal people are. So that's true. That could be another hypothesis, that he's not showing much emotion because perhaps, I'm not saying this, I don't know, but perhaps he has some psychopathic tendencies, and part of those tendencies or traits might be that he doesn't feel emotions in the way that most of us normally would.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for teaching us something tonight. I thought that was a great segue. I also liked, what was the book you referenced, or the topic? What was the research you referenced? The scientific?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a research article. It's called The Scientific Legacy of Sigmund Freud Toward a Psychodynamically Informed Psychological Science. Here's the cover page. Probably can't see it.
When you said the scientific, I thought you were going somewhere else. You were like, the
Oh,
scientific.
no, not the, I'm not talking about the scientific.
The scientific phenomenon.
No, this is this is a real scientific phenomenon. It's from Psychological Bulletin, 1998. Drew Weston, Westen. For those interested, it's actually it's an exceptional article on how not all of Freudian psychology is defunct. In fact, the basic tenets of Freudian psychology have a great deal of scientific validity. And even though this article was written in 1998, and so we're 25 years on from this article, a good deal of research has supported everything, or almost everything, in this article. So it's a good place to start if somebody's interested in some of those ideas.
Thank you. Well, we do have a big night tonight. So so this is what we'll do. We'll jump to, thank you, Dr. John. We will jump to, we have a sponsor for tonight. I'm going to play a message from our sponsor tonight, something that we love. And then after that, we are going to do a throwback back to 2021, the day, the day the James and Elena love story hit our inbox, because we were able to get all of the FOIA documents from Chandler, their Chandler, Arizona dump. And I read this to you, and I don't even know if you've read it since. So, and we'll just do a react. Anyway, here we go. We'll play this really quickly. Hidden Gems, it's Lauren, and this is actually an evening live, not a lunch live, about to go live with Dr. John. He's in his office over there preparing, and I am getting ready myself, because I just want to first off thank all of you for going live with me every day during the Chad Daybell trial. It's been incredible. I'm so grateful that people have been liking my lunch lives. In fact, John and I are talking about keeping lunch with Lauren going after the Chad Daybell trial, sharing cases that we're working on, covering, and keeping you guys in the loop. And speaking of in the loop, I also want to let you guys know about Dream. Many of you that have been on this channel before know that I love this product, and I want to share it with you because I actually have been having it in Boise with me, and I also have it here at home. I'm here for Mother's Day weekend, and you better believe that right after we're done with our show tonight, John knows that I will be making Beam's Dream in a mug. In fact, we love our mugs here. Let me see if I can turn this around. I don't even know if I can. Nope, I don't think I can. Okay, so here you go. This is the mug I'll be using today, Mama, for Mother's Day to make my Dream. And as you see here, I have many flavors of Dream. In fact, this one is my favorite. It's Dream CBD Nighttime. It's for a better sleep, sea salt caramel flavor. That's my favorite one. I also love the cinnamon cocoa flavor, as well as a few others. Guys, there's that cough. I call it the courtroom cough. Everyone has it, and I keep waiting for it to go away. But even though I can't control my cough, I have been able to control my insomnia, thank heavens, because going and sitting every day in the Chad Daybell trial is not easy. I'm so grateful for all of your support, all of you watching. You keep me motivated. Thank you so much. But it is true that my insomnia now is technically worse than it's ever been. Luckily, I have a solution. It is Dream. So I have it again. I have tons of packages here at our house, as well as a ton where I am staying in Boise, Idaho, and every night I am drinking it because it allows me to have energy the next day and to keep going. Because man, this is a marathon trial. And with John Pryor on defense, who knows how much longer this is going to go. I mean, let's hope we have a verdict come June. Anyway, I want to tell you, there's that cough, a little bit more also about Dream. Let's take this one for example. There's no sugar. It's vegan. We have a dairy issue in our family. I love that. It's 15 calories. I'm not counting calories these days, but I certainly don't like sugar before bed. And I like all natural things. It's actually monk fruit. We're not even talking artificial sweetener. We're talking all natural. It does have coconut. If you have an allergy to coconut, there you go. Other than that, it's pretty much allergen free. It has reishi mushroom in some of them. And like I said, you can get some with nano CBD or without. I personally like the nano CBD. Sorry, that sun, it's setting. It's almost time for our show, guys. And almost time for me to be taking or sipping my Dream. But don't worry, I won't do that until after this broadcast. But I just want to let you know that the link is in the description of this video. And if you use the code TRUECRIME, you can get 35% off. Hit the code in the description of this video, and then you enter the code not hidden, just true crime, plain old true crime. In fact, I talked to Dream and they said, why don't we just simplify this and do true crime? So the code to get our Dream for 35% off is true crime. This is how I've been surviving. It's so nice to just wind down, make my cup. We wind down as a family. We watch a show. This is another love one I love. Isn't it cute? I'm so glad to be back here for the weekend, feeling sentimental. And of course, the classic hidden true crime and delicate Venus flytrap. Although I would say this time around, this trial, it's not about the delicate Venus flytrap. It's about the pot stir. So here's to all the pot stirs. We thank you. Anyway, let's get back. Description, or you can click the link here and use code TRUECRIME for 35% off. Now, if anybody has an idea about how I can get rid of this cough, let me know. That's next up. And there you go. And during that commercial, by the way, we got a lot of great questions. So we might just be doing a marathon show. I just want to thank everyone too. Thank you so much. All right. Someone said, I wonder how much it would cost to have Morgan Freeman and do an audiobook reading of James and Elena. Wow. Who wants Morgan Freeman when you have me? No, just kidding. Just kidding. What I wanted was Keith Morrison. So I love that Rye, the guy, is saying that because you never know what will happen when you dare to dream. We have that for later. Well, no, let's play this now. Let's do this now. We read it. I'll say this. We read it. Here's a blast from the past. Should we play this now? And then we'll jump to it. But we read the love story on Patreon, as I shared. It's never been made public, but it will will tonight. And the Dateline producer heard it. And I made a wish. It wasn't for Morgan Freeman, but it was for Keith Morrison. Let's just play this really quickly.
That's a scientific phenomenon, Loin Fire. What I really want, actually, I want Keith Morrison to do an interview with someone and then say, did you say Loin Fire? That's what I really want. I'm here's to hoping, here's to dreaming.
Their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited makeout session took place in that lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena through the scientific phenomenon known as Loin Fire.
Loin Fire.
I'm not sure what science they're referring to there, but maybe like biblical science?
Fairly basic, I think.
I wouldn't call him madly in love. I'd call him madly in lust.
Well, there you go. So with that, let's listen to that podcast that the Dateline producer Shane Bishop heard. All right, guys, we'll pull this up. And the first time John's heard it since we've probably been on Dateline. I'm going to share it from our Patreon, actually. This is our Patreon, and that's where we'll share it from. So we'll pull it up. And can you guys hear it? Can you see it, John?
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay,
If you play, I can't hear it yet.
Okay.
Lauren wants to share some information. So you guys are going to get an exclusive look at my first reactions, or our first reactions as a couple, to this new information. Lauren has been...
Oh, it's not new information for me. I enjoyed reading it. And I don't even know if this information is new. I think this is stuff we've all known, but some things are confirmed. Some things are like, oh, this is how it went down. And then, we did watch a couple of the interviews last. Partially, yeah. So, and we're going to analyze those soon, but this is not an interview. This is Chad and Lori's love story, written by Chad Daybell.
Can't wait. Is it a fairy tale?
According to Chad, yes. Again, this is from his point of view, not Lori's, because he only thinks of his point of view.
Right.
So to give you context, this is from the Chandler Police Department. And they say on 7/14/2019, which happens to be your birthday and our anniversary.
Lovely.
What
better day for Chad's love story
to start. But more importantly than that, it's only 3 days after Charles Vallow was killed by Alex Cox, after he was murdered. So the police says, I noticed that Chad began to write Lori a story that was sent in many text messages throughout the day. The story seemed to be a romance novel of sorts about them, but the names were changed to James and Elena. In future text messages, Chad and Lori would refer to each other as James and Elena, or Raphael and Lily. The following is the story I observed between email and text messages. The text is just as it appears in the messages, not corrected for grammatical errors. So Chad's now, it's written on, again, July 14th, 2019, but he's going into a flashback. He's describing how they met.
Right. Okay.
Chad, quote, Friday morning, October 26th, driving south on the freeway, a voice said, you will meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever. End quote. Really quick, Lauren inserts here. This is the St. George conference that Melanie Gibb said that they allegedly met. So now we know this really is when
this is a text the day before the speech that we released, or that you released, of Chad talking to the Preparing a People group.
Correct. So at that Preparing a People conference in St. George, they met. We have that speech he gave, and that speech is going to come up. Chad mentions that speech, and we're going to hear soon some things about that speech. So that speech is on our YouTube channel. Okay. They really did meet here. Back to Chad's voice. Quote, this was shocking since such a thing seemed very unlikely at this conference. It was actually a very detailed story that began long ago in another world, and I will cover that part as I go along and the characters figure things out. But on the morning of October 26th, James arrived in St. George, still a bit baffled by the message he had received. He unloaded his books and set up his table, then joined the organizers for dinner in the main room. He saw his friend MG, Melanie Gibb, who had been so helpful to him when he spoke in Mesa that July. MG introduced James to her friend Elena. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him and his heart started beating fast. Elena, you wait. Elena.
What this is like? This okay. So
we haven't even. Let me keep going.
So this is like passing notes in junior high school or something.
Elena was gorgeous and vivacious, and James was a little intimidated, yet honored that she would talk to him. He was happily surprised when she mentioned a key part of his novel, The Renewed Earth. No one had ever recognized the significance of that scene before. He had heard that voice before and seen that smile before. He felt they had even talked like this before, but who could be certain when? It was strange, but he could remember. The feeling was very strong, as if they had known each other oh so long. They didn't get many chances to talk after that because he had to help voice a woman's blue Muppet, but he watched her every chance he could. He had to stay at a relative's house that night, but he hardly slept. He kept envisioning himself with Elena
in very wonderful situations that indicated they had been more than just friends. James was the first speaker Saturday morning. So here's the speech we released. James was the first speaker on Saturday morning and knew exactly where Elena was sitting. And he made sure to mention the scene from his book that he had discussed the previous evening. He was completely smitten by her and was even nervous of what she would think of his talk as he spoke. But when he would glance at her, she was always attentive and watching him, unlike the rest of the crowd. The rest of the crowd seemed to be enjoying it just as much, but he was staring at Lori through that whole speech we know now. After his talk, so back to Chad's voice, after his talk, he went to his book table. His talk had gone well, and there was a good group gathered around to buy books. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest when Elena joined him and helped sell the books. She was so beautiful that he could hardly concentrate on the customers. She straightened the books and gave the books great reviews, although she made him laugh a lot when she kept pushing the youth and 5th volumes of his first series. He could only giggle when people asked if she was his wife, because yes, in fact, she was. She just didn't know it yet. James was definitely having feelings towards Elena as they sold books together. He had not felt this happy in his entire life. He was quite sure this was the woman the voice had told him about. James was ecstatic because he had already fallen deeply in love with her. Or better said, he remembered how much he had already loved her. Her eyes had mesmerized him from the moment they met, but once the book sale slowed down, she stood near him behind the table. They looked deeply into each other's eyes, and for the first time, he knew he was in the presence of a goddess. He resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew. He instinctively knew she was everything he had ever dreamed of. I must clarify that James is a very difficult person to get information from. He has been blessed with great knowledge, but 99% of the people he knows do not realize that. That's interesting. That's how Chad feels about himself a little bit, right? I mean, anyway, that was interesting. He's very guarded, but is a great task to gain his trust. But as Elena leaned forward to him and asked a couple of very insightful questions, his heart burst with joy. He knew she was one of the few people on earth he could trust. James' spirit was so excited at this revelation that he shattered a thick veil that had been placed between these two souls during their mortal lives. The thick veil had been placed because of the unique, unparalleled love James and Elena had shared in previous lifetimes. The veil had prevented them from finding each other until this appointed day that would be remembered throughout the heavens, and the true beginning of a spectacular mission that would save millions of souls and defeat a force of darkness.
So do you want me to comment yet?
Yeah, go for it. There's no, you keep, whenever you want.
I mean,
The next paragraph's good, but she'll share now. Yeah.
Well, I think my initial observation is that we've talked about this in our podcast, but I've talked a lot about Lori having a fantasy of him because she's read his books. But I think it's clear now that Chad also had this massive, unrealistic fantasy of her. This is a woman who's been married. This is a woman who just murdered her husband that he knows about, right? He was in on that to some degree, or at least he's the one who labeled Charles as Ned Schneider. So he knows that this is a woman who is culpable in a murder and that she's been married 4 times. So this is, as in
Lori's no walk in the park. She's no,
as in
she's no innocent,
as in
virgin.
Right. As in, this is not necessarily this perfect goddess that he's envisioning. That realistically, somebody would look at that and say, okay, this is someone who has had some troubles in past relationships. Maybe I should be a little cautious, but not Chad Daybell.
Yeah.
Chad Daybell goes right to goddess, perfect, right? We're going to conquer the world. So I think what's
also
interesting
makes me wonder about other women at his book sales too. Has he always been fantasizing
Right.
about women at his book sales?
Well, I wonder if he's known Lauren. Like, how long have they been communicating before this?
So October 26th, 2019 was when they met, and that's the story he's telling. This is July
Right.
14th, 2019.
But have they been emailing previously?
We don't know.
Okay.
We don't know.
So anyway, first observation that Chad also has this really ridiculous fantasy of Lori, and it's probably not even about Lori. It's probably about like his ideal Mormon woman that's like blonde and looks a certain way, acts a certain way, right? That's what we're really talking about.
Yeah. Well, here we go. James's physical attraction to Elena was almost overwhelming.
Right.
So fantasy.
So right, there you go.
There you go.
Like he's got this prototype
Yeah.
of like the perfect Stepford Mormon wife that he's harbored for years and years, right? So
right.
okay.
You did too. That's why you
Right.
married me.
Yeah, that's true. But
As I
but
said,
I as someone who works with criminals all the time, I think I approach every relationship with some caution. So, and I don't expect perfection ever. So I'm
Thank goodness.
I'm perfectly content for people to be imperfect.
Yeah. So James's physical attraction to, back to Chad's voice. James's physical attraction to Elena was almost overwhelming, but he was equally drawn to the spiritual energy that was radiating from her.
Radiating?
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is
that's
the
good.
woman who killed her husband 3
Right.
days
Yeah.
ago.
Right. Yep. There it is. It's
As-
radiating.
As they talked, it was confirmed to him that they had indeed been married before and were eternal companions.
Mhm.
I mean, talk about controlling to like, you're mine. He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together.
Dusty paths. Okay. Okay.
And he realized they had been married.
Dusty paths paved with gold. Is that part of that?
I think of like a Western movie,
Yeah, I don't know.
like
Okay.
with like the whistling music.
Yeah, whatever. I guess it's poetic license.
He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together, and he realized they had been married during the life of Jesus Christ, and they had been very close to him. So now these two,
Oh my gosh.
who conspired to kill Charles were very close to Jesus Christ, walking their dusty paths together.
Right. Certainly doing some really fine spiritual work there.
At this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited makeout session took place in that lobby. Why does it make me giggle too when he says makeout session? It's like he's taking a term from his kids.
It's like junior high school.
I know. So a long-awaited makeout session. It doesn't seem very long-awaited either. Took place in the lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena through the scientific phenomenon known as Loin Fire.
What? What the?
When someone puts Loin Fire and scientific phenomenon into the same.
So, I mean, look, I don't want to be crude about this, but is he talking about like an erection? Like what?
As they talked, I'll keep going. As they talked, James had a burning desire to make love to her, but he wasn't sure she felt the same way. But they could not stay away from each other. One time she was sitting in a couch near his table, and he took a seat on a chair about 5 feet from her. She began to squirm and covered her body with her hands. She asked him, "What are you doing?" He wasn't aware of what she meant. All he knew is that if Bruce Porter hadn't been giving them an evil eye, a child would have been conceived on that couch. Also, who's Bruce Porter?
This is in public? I mean,
I just want Bruce
Right.
Porter, if you're listening, give us a
Right.
call. Let us know.
Yeah, is Bruce Porter like a chaperone at the? Does this happen a lot?
At the Preparing of People conference.
Right. Is Bruce Porter? Is he like the hired chaperone for all these swingers that show up at these conferences? Apparently, I don't know. Okay, keep going.
He's there because of the scientific phenomenon known as Loin
Yeah,
Fire.
that's something I've studied quite a bit. Yeah, it's highly researched.
The erotic tension continued throughout the afternoon. James could only think of her. His desire for her was indescribable. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather, so he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about. But that revelation would have to wait a month.
Right. So it's exactly what I said. He's obviously he has this huge fantasy of like the perfect Mormon woman, and he's like elevating her goddess status
because she had the perfect body dimensions that he had fantasized about.
Never mind her mind. You know, I mean, looking at Chad's history, this is someone who didn't date a lot. He was rejected by a lot of women in high school, right? They thought he was kind of a loser. And then he basically falls in love with and marries the first woman who's interested in him.
And he's always fantasized about the cheerleader.
So there's a lot of lust.
Child, yeah.
This is clearly someone who has thought about being with other women.
Clearly.
That, you know, during the time that he's been married for so many years.
Clearly. As the night concluded, James needed to take his empty boxes to his car. With Elena's help, he had sold more books at the show than he had ever had before. She helped him carry the boxes to the car, and then he could not resist the desire to hug her. He made an awkward attempt that was way too brief because their friends were bringing more boxes. In that short embrace, though, he knew he had found the woman he had been searching for his entire life. It was made crystal clear to him that they had been married before, and they would be again. He once again had to fight off a powerful urge to kiss her and somehow disguise the massive erection he was experiencing.
So I was right about the Loin Fire, the scientific
phenomenon.
part. Yeah, okay.
It is scientific. They returned to the building, and he helped her carry tables to the second floor while she sat on the couch. They couldn't take their eyes off each other. He was already madly in love. Her group of friends finally had to leave. He was devastated, unsure how he would ever contact her again. Then her spirit took over and asked him, "Can I get your cell number in case I have some questions?" The action-oriented one, by the way. Lori. He's talking about Loin Fire and thinking he's never going to see his future wife again. And she's like, "Let me get your number." So there you go. That's, you know, it shows you who they are.
Yeah.
He's the one with the fantasies, and she's the one making it happen.
Right. But she has the same fantasies about him.
Right.
Maybe not as lustful, but she clearly has some fantasies about about the perfect Mormon guy.
So she said, "Can I get your cell number in case I have some questions?" They exchanged numbers, and then they gave each other a hug goodbye. It was the most wonderful, electric, delicious hug he had ever felt. And then he watched her walk away, knowing she was truly going to change his life forever. End of chapter 1, he says. Chapter 2. There are only 2 chapters.
Okay. It's like, oh my gosh.
James sadly walked to his car after watching Elena disappear down the hallway, but he couldn't deny the connection and his absolute attraction to her. She still seemed way out of his league, but he nervously sent her a text before driving to his hotel. A minute passed, then 2, without a response. He kicked himself for thinking he ever had a chance with her. And then his phone buzzed. Elena had texted back! Exclamation point for emphasis. His heart soared, and over the next few hours, they texted back and forth dozens of times. He knew she was staying at a home in Tokerville, and he desperately wanted to drive there and whisk her back to the hotel for a night of reconnection and romance. He twice got redressed during the night to go see her, but the spirit gently said, "Have patience. Everything will work out as it is supposed to." They finally stopped texting at around 4 a.m., and when he closed his eyes to sleep, he was taken again to their previous life together. The intense passion of their lovemaking was a sight to behold. He knew it would be difficult, but he could be patient if it meant he could experience that type of love just once in his life.
This is like cliche after cliche. And not only that, like this whole thing about her being out of his league.
Right. I knew you'd mention that.
That clearly shows, that goes back to those issues we talked about on our podcast about this is someone who felt insignificant.
Yes.
This is someone who felt like a loser to some degree.
Yes.
And he's telling you that. So this is a guy who's going to run the New Jerusalem, who's claiming to be a prophet, and he's intimidated by someone who just murdered.
Well, she didn't just here.
No, right. What I mean is that that 3 days after the murder, he wrote this.
Right. He wrote this. Right. No, I know. And it is. And then it's like classic. It's like classic, like 80s teenage rom-com that the nerd sends the text, or it would have been a phone call then, and he kicks himself for thinking he would ever have a chance with her. And then his phone buzzes. Like, this is like a 50-year-old man living out, some teenage fantasy.
This is someone who clearly didn't have a lot of dating experience, that married early. But more than that, like the part about saying that she's out of his league, that's really noteworthy, I think, because it shows how he feels about himself.
Yeah. And through this thing, he'll say a couple times, you'll notice it. And I'll bring it up now. I can't believe she likes me, or I can't believe she felt the same way.
Yeah, that's like junior high.
Right. So
he's actually some of the motivation here is that it's a boost to his self-esteem.
Yes.
To try to live, not because of Lori, but because of this fantasy. Like that somehow he's getting more self-esteem because the culture, or at least his culture, Mormon culture, is telling him this is the perfect woman you should be with.
Extreme Mormon culture. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And what else was I going to say to that? Anyway, I'll just keep reading.
Okay.
As he lay in the hotel bed, it was as if her spirit had joined him. They wrapped around each other and kissed gently, then intensely, and the emotions they shared were not of this world. I've got to bring something up, though. In our podcast, when Lori says it was a love not of this world, talking about Jesus Christ, you made a lot of emphasis on that Lori says in her testimony at Melanie Gibbs' house. This is before she met Chad. Lori says, the love of Jesus Christ is not of this world.
Right. And that we talked a lot about this idea that Lori had created this fantasy too. So this, by the way, is an interesting question about love. We're not going to get into this too much, but there's a well-known psychologist by the name of Irvin Yalom who talks about how, in many ways, love is an illusion. It's always an illusion to some degree. Not for the healthier couples, by the way, not for the couple sitting here, but but it's interesting that you have essentially two fantasies or two illusions coming together here. And that is clearly not the foundation, or a good foundation upon which to build a solid relationship, right? It's not, this relationship is either doomed at some point, or it's going to come to a tragic end, which we obviously know it did. But this is why, by the way, this is not the way you want to go about building a healthy relationship.
Right. Oh, and I know what I wanted to say before I continue too. Going back, the last sentence we didn't bring up. He said he knew it would be difficult, but he could be patient if it meant he could experience this type of love just once in his life. That's interesting about Chad too. Like, in other words, just to experience like sex and lust with a woman he's lusting over just once in his life would be worth.
He's also telling you that he fell in love with and married the first girl that showed an interest in him. So, right. So it wasn't really the person he wanted to marry, but he did, because it made him feel good about himself.
I wish I could have changed Tammy's future for her. So James woke up in the hotel room feeling happier than he had in his entire life. It felt like he and Elena had fit together perfectly in every way. He rolled over to kiss her, but then reality struck. She was actually more than 20 miles away in Tokerville with her Arizona friends. He texted her, and she quickly responded. He deeply regretted not going to be with her the night before. It was as if he already knew the taste of her lips, and his hands knew every curve of her body. He knows his dreams were somehow real, and that they were actually traveling to each other in a higher dimension. He hungered for her in ways he didn't think were possible. The voice was right. Elena was going to change his life forever. He was right.
Right, no doubt about that.
Yeah. He packed his suitcase and began driving north on the freeway. As each mile passed, James could feel Elena's spirit beckoning for him to join her. As he approached the Tokerville exit, it took every ounce of willpower to keep driving on the freeway. His attraction to her was beyond magnetic. He felt their souls were two halves of an eternal union. Tears filled his eyes, and he passed the freeway exit. He desperately yearned to embrace her and tell her he deeply loved her, as crazy as that sounded. But he knew he would be seeing her in 3 weeks later at a conference in Arizona. It seemed like an eternity away, but he sensed it would be a very significant weekend for them. He was already crazy about her, and his feelings of admiration and affection for her would only grow more intense and wonderful. So a couple things to point out there. This Mesa conference is where he stayed at her house, that infamous
that
conference.
Was the pendulum
So we're going to hear about that conference.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'm noticing too, like, he's madly, deeply in love with her. And this is after he's known her for a while, and he still hasn't said anything about her personality. It's all about longing for her embrace. It's about the sex. It's about sex.
Well, and it's again, it's this fantasy. The fantasy is largely about physical connection and not emotional or psychological or mental, right? There's no talk at all about values or what she can bring to the table that's not physical.
Right. And then I also want to point out too that 3 days after they met, we always talked about this because it was always allegedly they met in St. George. Now we're hearing from Chad that this really is where they met.
Yeah.
It was actually, now that we know, the talk he gave was on the 28th. It was 2 days later. So it was on the 30th of October. So they met on the 27th. He gave a speech on the 28th. 2 days after he gave that speech, he wrote her and told her Tylee was dark. So just keep that in mind too. And she didn't run for the hills after she heard that. So anyway, during his long...
And also that shows how much he was consumed by lust.
Right.
That I think it speaks to some of his motivation, that he's obviously not thinking rationally.
Right.
But he wants Tylee out of the way. Like, he sees Tylee as a nuisance.
Yeah. I wonder if she was there in St. George or something. Yeah. During his long drive home, which is a long drive, St. George to Rexburg is a very long drive. It would be one I probably would have flown. But during his long drive home, James was able to text back and forth with Elena. And it was clear they were extremely compatible and shared the same interests. It felt like talking to a long-distance best friend. When he arrived home, he searched the internet for anything about her, but there was nothing. She was a fascinating mystery that he wanted to spend the rest of eternity with. I would never want to spend eternity with a mystery, by the way. I know nothing about you, but let's do this forever.
Right. There's something super immature about that.
Yes.
I mean, this whole thing is ridiculously immature.
At the end of his drive, she suggested that they talk on the phone the next day. He was thrilled at the thought of hearing her voice again. He was falling more madly in love by the minute. When James heard her voice that Monday morning, the euphoria he had felt Saturday came rushing back strongly. They talked for 2 hours, but it seemed to be only minutes. He was obsessed with her and couldn't get enough. That's accurate. He was obsessed. During the first conversation with Elena, James realized she had a strong understanding of many of the truths he had been taught regarding how the universe really worked. The lounge fire and obsession, I think he meant Loin Fire.
Loin Fire.
The Loin Fire.
It's a scientific fact.
The Loin Fire and obsession with each other had no real explanation unless they truly had a spiritual connection before this life. Loin Fire, by the way, the scientific phenomenon of Loin Fire has no other explanation unless they had a spiritual connection in another life.
Right, because there's no physiological reaction to being in front of someone you lust after. I guess right. That's the only explanation.
He was able to help clarify many of the promptings and impressions she had felt in recent years. She knew she had lived on Earth before, and James was able to clarify when. So James is able to tell her everything. They had been married before on this Earth and other times on a previous Earth. Their love truly spanned the universe and eons of times. They knew the Lord had brought them together again for a crucial mission that only they could accomplish as a united couple. This is like straight out of...
Right, but that's consistent with, like, it's the mission. We've always said this. That's the whole point of this. It's
Yes.
that mission that leads this whole tragedy. Right?
Totally.
And because of that mission, they're willing to sacrifice children.
It's awful to have
And spouses.
just to have a month of good sex in Hawaii for Chad Daybell.
Right, for Chad Daybell.
During the next week, they spoke every day for at least an hour, but often longer. They hungered to know everything about each other. This was a new experience for James to open up and share the true feelings of his heart. But he knew he could trust her completely. The bond between them was intense, and only the vast distance between them kept their passion for each other from roaring into a blazing inferno.
Well, wait, didn't they have portals?
Well,
I guess the portals didn't satisfy their lust.
I mean, he kind of implied that he got into a spiritual embrace with her in the hotel room, like in St. George. He kind of mentioned that. I'm sure that was like a portal
but he's
moment.
saying he's worried about distance when he has the ability to enter portals. I don't understand.
Well, maybe they haven't, thrown portals into their relationships yet. I mean, it
Okay.
took us a while
He
before
doesn't
we talked portals.
No, that's true. So he didn't want to reveal the portal secret right away. That was something he held back.
I don't know. Let's keep reading and find out.
Let's find out.
She quickly became his best friend, or better said, two best friends had reunited, and their prior love was now united again into a wonderful heavenly way, right? And a strong love has to be a heavenly love, an out of this world love. As November began, James and Elena had talked on the phone every day since last seeing each other. He was extremely impressed with her intelligence, personality, and subtle humor that made him laugh more than he ever had in his lifetime. She was a complete delight to talk to, and the highlight of his day when he could hear her magical voice. It was so familiar to him and actually healed and soothed his heart and soul. They would both attend the same event in mid-November, and it seemed like that day would never arrive. Each day, they opened their hearts to each other a little more. James knew he could trust her with the mysteries of the universe that had been revealed to him. He knew they had been married before, and they had been close friends with the Savior when he lived in Jerusalem. So they were just besties.
Yeah, just hanging out with Jesus.
Just Jesus on dusty paths.
Just chilling with Jesus.
Yeah, James had actually served as an important position in the Lord's church, and Elena had been his beloved spouse and best friend. So James was this important man, and then Elena was his beloved spouse and best friend. Their relationship was now meant to continue into this lifetime. In Jerusalem, James and Elena had enjoyed tremendous intimacy. Their physical desire for each other was unmatched, and they were fortunate that they could be alone morning, noon, and night, and they seized every chance to passionately express their love to each other. They simply, I mean, it's really just feel like I'm reading like some like 12-year-olds,
I know.
12-year-old boys.
Right. You're right. Yeah, 12, 13.
13, yeah, sorry.
Like some 13-year-old's diary.
14-year-old.
13, 14,
Yeah.
Something like that. Right. Junior high.
Junior high, yeah.
Late junior high.
Sorry,
This is
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
stereotype an age here. I just mean a young, like teenage boys.
Somebody who's inexperienced. Right.
They simply could never get enough, even after many years of marriage. Everyone knew they were crazy about each other, and they were a wonderful example of how spouses should cleave together in unity and love. So they were a wonderful example. This really does. Maybe this is why I mentioned 12. When I was 12, I wrote my future out, and I had a wishing well in a house, and I wrote my family and how we'd be great examples. That's what this reminds me of. It's like,
But you didn't have a Chad Daybell.
no.
Too bad.
No, I think I said I was going to marry a lawyer or something. My dad was a lawyer, so I think that was like my thing. Didn't marry a lawyer, so clearly my visions aren't accurate. James had visions, though, of how they would happily and joyfully pleasure each other in his office.
What? In his office?
In his office.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had two favorite positions that particularly bonded them together. Nothing meant more to James than holding Elena in his arms and unifying their bodies in perfect synchronization.
Okay.
As James and Elena talked on the phone, he tried to delicately describe their connection to each other, and he was delighted that she believed him. That's important.
Right. Right.
He
Yeah.
was delighted that she believed him. You've mentioned that before, that he probably couldn't believe someone else.
Well, yeah, right. That she's gullible. I mean, I don't, yeah, that's an interesting line. Does it suggest that he knows he's making this up?
He tried to delicately describe their connection to each other, and he was delighted that she believed him.
I think it's more, I think he believes it. It's more about finding someone who's willing to
Take the bait.
take the bait. Somebody's willing, right? Somebody's willing to embrace his vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they really are gas and like gasoline
Yeah.
and a match.
Right.
He also shared that they had been married other times on a previous world, and she had accepted this information as well. Like she accepted all of his information. She
Yeah.
believed him. And also we know now Chad was telling her this stuff, and she was listening and believing him.
Well, she had read his books.
Yeah,
I think she was kind of primed for this moment.
sure. But that's also important though, he's the one with the belief system is what I'm trying to say there.
Right. That's what that's
Yeah.
what I've always said is
He is telling her what to believe.
Right.
She believes him.
He's the puppet master.
She accepts things. He tells her they've been married in other previous worlds, and she accepts this
Right.
information.
She goes along with it.
Right. James was overjoyed to have these memories restored to him because he truly loved her with all of his heart, and he knew they were meant to be married again and complete important missions together before the second coming. Like it's so like now we're getting into, a role-playing game, the second coming, like they have this mission. He was ecstatic that she was receiving confirmation of these things as well. So he would tell her and she'd receive confirmation. So that's interesting. As they talked on the phone, the spiritual connection was so intense that they also produced physical desires. And it was as if their spirits were making love despite the great distance between them.
That's the portal.
Right. James knew his spirit was visiting her spirit during those conversations. He also became aware that his spirit would visit her at night. And they
Oh, man.
Oh, boy. Two married Mormons in a hotel room. Mormon preppers.
Whatever happened. Where's the chaperone when you need him?
Yeah, they're not in the hotel. Where's Bruce Porter?
Yeah, where's Bruce Porter when you need him?
Bruce, call him Bruce.
Bruce could have prevented a whole lot of tragedy.
You there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have to.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
John asked me to get a break to say something.
Yeah, no, I just need I need a moment here. I didn't, people are writing how cringeworthy it is, and I'm like, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. I'm having a harder time with it this time. It's pretty creepy, I guess. Somebody mentioned that people were killed. Somebody, to quote one of our listeners, the people were killed over this BS. Right? There's for me this time, I mean, it is absurd, but there's also something kind of, sad and tragic about it too. And maybe I'm feeling some of that more this time. So I just felt like maybe we should pause for a minute and catch our breaths, or I don't know. It's ridiculous, but it's also, you know, it also got people murdered, and I mean, I don't know. It's anyway. I wanted a little break and just to check in with you, and
Yeah. I'm glad that you did that.
I'm noticing it's longer than I thought too. There's still quite a bit of time left. So do people want to continue this?
Let's ask. You guys let us know. I think it's probably something that we should continue and finish and conclude. But yeah, I think
people are, I don't know. It's mixed. Some people are saying no. I don't know. I mean,
let's keep going and see. I feel like we need a conclusion, and you share some
Okay.
things at the end that are profound. So I think we keep going. And John, you don't have to, if you want to pause it, you can talk on your mic too. Like just talk too, if you want me to pause it again.
okay.
Okay. Before I continue, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think it's
There has to be a
You know,
balance.
having had a couple of years to digest it, I think, you know, I'm hearing it a little differently. You know, I'm seeing it through the lens of a tragedy, you know. But I mean, but on the other hand, it's important to understand that this is real.
Correct.
And this letter, this text thread is probably one of the most important insights into Chad Daybell's mind and psyche too. So I guess it's important to read it. Obviously, the prosecution recognizes that too, because they're reading the letter now in court, and they understand the gravity and the importance of this text thread. So,
Right.
but I think it's, to me right now, it's certainly, I certainly see the absurdity and how ridiculous it is, but you know, there's, like I said, there's something sad about it too. So
I agree.
but yeah,
And I think too, and I think you know, you haven't been watching the trial as much as I have, you know, and I think that's probably a bit of it too, you know. It's been really heavy.
yeah,
It's been really hard. And me wanting to laugh, you know that it's
right.
what you've seen is so heavy.
No, I agree. I mean,
But it's true. It is true that this is real. This is the evidence.
it is such a crucial piece of this puzzle, and it does really provide tremendous insights into Chad's thinking, and it provides insights into how Chad could get to the point that, you know, he was able to participate in multiple murders.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like we should listen to the end,
Okay.
only to conclude it. But let's do it this way. If we can try to speed it up a little bit, and if it's too much, we'll stop. And John, you don't have to. John texted me to pause it. You can just use your mic. Just turn on your mic and talk, and request to stop it too, if it's too much.
Yeah, and I don't remember. I do have some current.
Good to regroup and balance and remind that. Yeah, there were some things that were hard to hear. I agree.
I do have some.
And with Tammy, you know, Tammy deserves so much more.
I do have some thoughts that I didn't discuss back then, although I don't remember exactly what I concluded with in this, but you know, I think there's some ideas that I would like to talk about. If I don't think I talked about them back then, but
let's yeah, and let's see, John. We could also, I think I could make it faster.
okay.
Too. Let's try that. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's get through this. And you're right. It's longer than I thought too. So that makes 2 of us.
We need to find Bruce.
Yeah, we need to talk to Bruce.
I found Bruce.
They were soon standing alone in the room, and he put his arm around her and looked into her gorgeous blue eyes. They hungered for each other. Also, I like how he puts what he's thinking into her mind. That's so narcissistic too. They hungered for each other.
Also, he uses every possible cliche.
I know,
like,
over and over again.
hungered for each other.
I
Like,
know.
It's just
Loin Fire.
right. It's just one cliche after another.
I know.
But anyway,
He leaned forward and fulfilled the promise he had made to her a few days earlier. He gently kissed her tender lips, and the same heavenly electricity filled his entire body. The passionate magic that they had felt many centuries earlier came surging back powerfully. James moved to the couch.
I think him talking about that is like an insurance policy in case she rejects him. He
How
can
you
fall
doing,
back on. Well, wait.
You did
We had
this.
this passion in the past.
We moved to the couch in the hotel room.
Oh my gosh.
And Elena straddled him effortlessly, as if they had done this thousands of times before. She fit perfectly on him, and they pressed their loins tightly against each other. The feeling was exquisite, and they both smiled and moaned at the sensations passing between them. They were still fully clothed. That he throws in that line. Mormons are going to be Mormons. But the intensity of the intimacy was undeniable. James felt the powerful desire to bless Elena at that time. It's awkward. And they stayed in that favorite position. He moved his hands to her head. So as they stayed...
She's straddling him and he's going to like bless her. Okay. So
as they stayed in this position, like this
Yeah.
sexual position is
Uh-huh.
what I'm hearing, he then moved his hands to her head and began to cleanse and purify each part of her body. He could feel the pains and trouble she had endured throughout her life being removed from her soul and being taken outside and destroyed. James is, as a therapist, I'm sure that's how it works, right?
That, by the way, is such a manipulation. That is such a manipulation. Like he's basically telling her, I'm the one who's going to save you. I'm the one who can remove all your pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's finding ways to create dependency
Mm-hmm.
already. Like that's creating a huge amount of dependency for someone who wants to be dependent.
Yeah, you're right. And he's texting her this. I removed all of your
Yeah.
pain. I destroyed any
Right.
pain you've had. He took it outside, and then James worked his way down her body and lingered briefly on her beautiful breasts. She truly had the body of a goddess, and he was experiencing an indescribable mix of physical and spiritual ecstasy. He soon concluded the cleansing of her body from head to toe, then filled her body with a balm of light and love.
Again, manipulation. But,
Yeah.
okay.
James could see the happiness in her eyes, and instinctively their mouths came together again. The fire was burning strong with them both, and as their kissing grew more intense, he gently said, I love you, Elena. Those words sparked a frenzy within them. Their tongues effortlessly intertwined, and their hips gyrated in a smooth, erotic rhythm. Two lovers, long separated, were finally united in heavenly bliss. It's always heavenly. It's always...
Right. So there's always a rationalization. It's okay. They're both, well, he's married, but there's a rationalization.
No, they're both married because this is in Mesa.
Charles
was killed 3 days before this text came. He's now talking about Mesa.
but he's writing this after the fact.
Right. He's writing this. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
He's writing this after the fact. So,
Right.
So it's a rationalization.
Right.
In other words, like combining the physical and the spiritual is a way of him
Totally.
saying, yeah,
It's okay.
right.
After a few minutes of excitement, pleasure, and fun on the couch, James and Elena both felt compelled to change into more comfortable clothing. James out in some athletic shorts and a blue shirt, and Elena put on a stunning black top and tight leggings. The top revealed just enough, but not too much, and James was overjoyed at the sight.
Again, this is like a junior high school. This is like a junior high school kid with like, models, pinups models in his room or something.
Right. Yeah, tight leggings. Leggings are tight. But James took her in his arms and they smiled at each other. The vibration in the room was intense and their hearts reached out to each other in a glorious reunion. James gently touched the sides of Elena's breasts and he was in ecstasy. She stood on her tiptoes and gave him a sensual kiss that sent electricity throughout his body. They moved towards the bed and were quickly intertwined around each other. She was so beautiful, loving, and enchanting that James could hardly breathe. They were both aroused, but knew there were limitations in what could occur that night. But they kissed for nearly an hour and pressed against each other tightly. Towards the end of the evening, Elena laid on her stomach at the end of the bed and James caressed her fabulous body. He grasped her perfect bottom with both hands and she expressed how much she loved that. She soon sat up and straddled him again as they passionately kissed farewell. She knew they would see each other again in the morning, but the separation seemed too long. They knew that the long wait to find their eternal match had come to an end. So they were a long wait. They were both looking for their eternal match. It wasn't their eternal spouses that they were married to in the temple. And James was overjoyed beyond description. James and Elena had agreed to visit the temple the following morning. So this whole temple trip and the Reddit email, the infamous Reddit email, here you go.
This is where Moroni.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, seals them.
Yes. Which, guys, there are some redacted lines in that Reddit email. I'll just throw that out. That's some new info we have. We might share it soon. She returned to the hotel room, and after additional romance on the couch, they calmed their nerves enough to give each other a blessing. As James placed his hands on her head, he connected with Elena's true eternal self. He knew he was in the presence of an exalted goddess who had returned to Earth to perform a special mission. This mission included being with him. And manipulative, as you say, and they would progress together as translated beings. The full plan wasn't yet completely clear to him, but the immense power radiated from her confirmed his belief that she was among the greatest women in the universe.
Well, is there competition beyond Earth?
Yes.
Like, is she competing with aliens somewhere?
They talk about living on multiple planets.
Yeah, true.
So, yes, the greatest woman in the universe.
Yeah.
She then gave him a tremendous blessing and helped him realize how much she truly loved him and wanted. She then gave him a tremendous blessing that helped him realize how much she truly loved him and wanted to be with him forever. That's interesting. So she gave him a blessing, and in that blessing, what he needed was
right. So
reassurance.
This is the moment. This is game over right here. This is the moment when Chad Daybell has total control of Lori.
And it also shows that what she wanted in a blessing was, you're a goddess and you have this amazing mission. What he wanted in a blessing was, just reassure me and tell me how much you love me. I need that. Tell me I'm
great. Tell me I'm fine.
Yeah. She gave him a blessing that helped him realize how much she truly loved him and wanted to be with him forever. In other words, that's what Chad needed.
That's consistent with me saying that the children were
choose me.
The children that her decision to participate in the murder of her kids was another example of how far she would go.
Right. Choose me over your kids, over your husband, over your life. Reassure me that this is
how far she would go to be with him or to follow his directions.
Right. He was deeply humbled that such an incredible woman regarded him so highly. His heart burned.
Such an incredible woman that just murdered her husband 3 days before.
His heart burned as she blessed him. And he had glimpses come to his mind of not only their life in Jerusalem, but even as a couple on a previous earth. He knew that they had been eternal companions for eons and that their love was beyond celestial. They embraced following the blessings, and the emotions they felt were a mix. Go ahead. Oh.
Well, when this kind of talk is, I think this kind of talk is going to be really important for the prosecution because it shows that he's not grounded in reality at all. That he sees this, he's so intensely wrapped up in this that he's not thinking about the consequences of murder. Right? Like he's so immersed in her and this whole fantasy that, I mean, not to mention which all the other spiritual stuff, right? But that he's incapable of understanding that there might be consequences at this point for murdering kids.
Totally. They embraced following the blessings and the emotions they felt. Also, I always love how he tells her what her emotions are. It's something I noticed. The emotions they felt were a mixture of eternal bliss and telestial desire. The sexual chemistry was undeniable, but the spiritual unity was a glorious bonus for them both. They had both only known each other for 3 weeks, but two lonely, misunderstood souls had finally found their best friend that they could trust and confide in. So he calls himself a lonely, misunderstood soul.
Even though he's been married for 20 years with 5 kids.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
Right. Now I finally have found my best friend.
Right, which is mean he's finally found his fantasy.
Right. Yeah. That it reassures him and tells him he's wonderful and believes everything he says.
It also suggests that maybe Tammy sees him as a little bit of, I don't know, Brett. Maybe Tammy sees him as a bit of a loser.
You know, he definitely married up with Tammy. I'm sure she felt that.
She sees him as potentially.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that
he feels inadequate with her.
She has to work to make a living, you know?
He's writing his books.
He's writing his books. She's working. She's running the publishing company. She's the one encouraging him. Yeah. He was a loser. So I'm sure she realized that. They arrived at the temple. They were soon sealed in the sealing room facing each other. Elena looked so stunning as she smiled at him, seemed so calm, while he felt quite nervous. Their opportunity soon came to kneel across the altar from each other. James and Elena knew that they were now sealed as husband and wife for eternity. As the earthly sealing was taking place, a similar scene involving their spirits was happening on a higher plane. When they kissed and unified their souls, they knew they had just begun a new journey together that was eternal and never ending.
Never mind that he's still married at this point, but okay.
But eternal and never ending, that seems like that death anxiety, like he wants to be immortal.
Yeah.
Eternal and never ending. They have a new journey together that's never ending. Like we're never going to die. This is for forever. You are mine and I am yours forever.
Well, it might end in an Idaho prison at some point, by the way, but okay.
After the sealing, they went to lunch together and they felt so comfortable together. Everything felt so right. James could look into her eyes forever unless he was gently kissing her and telling her how much he loved her. Even when they held hands, there was a powerful vibration that exceeded the celestial world. They attended the conference, but their thoughts were completely focused on each other. James gave a talk that was well received and sparked great interest in his books. Elena joined him at the selling table, and they sold more than 359, not 359 books, but more than 359 books within a couple of hours, but they really wanted to slip away and express their love to each other. We're almost done, babe. They went to dinner with some friends, but afterwards they were able to find some time alone. They drove to a secluded area and slipped into the back seat. So these are two 50-year-olds. Or near 50-year-olds getting in the back seat.
Getting in the back seat of their car. I mean, again, like this is like junior high. You know, we can't go to my parents' house.
Yeah. They drove to a secluded area and slipped into the back seat. Elena was wearing a pair of incredibly sexy jeans, and as she straddled James in the back seat, he once again grasped her fantastic bottom. She pushed him back into a reclining position, and their loins fit perfectly together. They kissed passionately and rhythmically pulsated against each other. Their love was so intense and undeniably real. James was now madly, crazily in love with her, and it was so wonderful to know she felt the same way about him. Like he repeats that over and over again. And all I need to know is that you feel the same.
He needs constant validation,
Constant validation.
which is consistent with the whole issue we've talked about feeling significant and worthy.
Totally makes sense. Do you choose me or your kids too? Like this
Right,
whole idea,
right.
like
He's
proving
testing
to
her.
me. Yeah. How important am I?
It's the ultimate
He's
test.
testing. Yeah.
Yeah.
One powerful moment happened earlier that day when Elena was listening to another speaker while James stayed at the table. But he thought he heard Elena say, "Come, stand behind me." He went into the table and saw her standing against a wall. He moved behind her and then they discreetly touched. After a few minutes, he checked his phone and saw that she had texted him that very sentence at the stone, but he had heard her voice. It was a wonderful testament that they were already communicating with each other on a higher level. They helped clean up the conference, and Elena graciously allowed James to stay in a spare bedroom at her home that night. And this is when Charles was out of town, to
Right.
remind everyone, in Mesa.
Yeah.
This is at Charles's home in Arizona. She's hosting people and is allowing someone she's having an affair with to sleep in a spare bedroom. They visited with other friends until after midnight, and then they all went to bed. James anxiously hoped Elena would join him in the spare room. It took a while for everyone to settle into their beds. But once the house quieted down, James opened his door slightly and saw the wondrous sight of Elena approaching the room. They locked the door behind her and quickly got under the covers. He was wearing his athletic shorts. He likes his athletic shorts. He keeps mentioning them. Chad and his athletic shorts. And she was wearing tight, thin leggings and a loose top. They clung to each other and kissed desperately, hungrily. James placed his hands under her top and caressed her splendid breasts. She moaned happily and wrapped her legs around his waist. Only two thin layers of material separated their loins, and they could feel each other's most intimate body parts in detail. The intensity and spiritual vibration exceeded anything either one of them had ever felt before. They knew their spirits were actually intimately joined together, and it felt like they had left the celestial world. Elena soon got on top of James, and the rhythmic ecstasy continued for several more minutes. Towards the end, they both removed their tops, and they pressed their bodies together. Skin on skin. He wants to make it clear.
In case you forgot.
They fit together perfectly. He says that a lot. And their kisses were deep and frenzied. Their desire for each other was beyond compare. I know it's every cliche. As the reunion in the spare room came to a conclusion, Raphael knew Elena was his perfect match. They longed to stay entwined together, but it would be best to separate and get some rest. But by 6 a.m., James could not stand to be away from her any longer. He slipped into her bedroom, creepy, and stood at her bedside, creepier. She was unbelievably gorgeous, and he greatly desired to join her in the bed and continue the previous night's activities, but there were other guests in the house who weren't yet aware of their sizzling love for each other. So he gently touched her shoulder to awaken her. Her eyes opened, and then she reached up and grabbed his arm and pulled him into the bed. He smiled, realizing she wasn't fully awake and had likely been dreaming of him. He simply whispered that he loved her and hoped she would go walking with him in the neighborhood. James and Elena had enjoyed a walk together the previous morning along the quiet streets of her gated community. The sensual attraction between them had been intense, and they had touched shoulders and held hands as they walked. They were like magnets that could not be separated. What a great analogy, Chad. Magnets. She had worn exercise leggings that drove him crazy with desire. The leggings emphasized her perfectly sculpted bottom, and it took all of his willpower not to pull her to him and grasp that bottom firmly and with both hands.
He did it to storage unit.
Right. While kissing her passionately. Right. Now we know that wasn't the first time.
Yeah.
They went walking again that next morning. Unfortunately, a friend invited herself along, but James and Elena were still completely engrossed in each other. He had to catch a flight home later that morning, but he was able to give Elena a special blessing before departing. Another blessing. Here we go. And as he placed his hands on her head, he felt their spirits connect with a surge of power. At that moment, his only desire in life, that's pretty powerful, his only desire in life was to be with her as always throughout eternity. And that desire has continued to intensify. During the blessing, he was shown the great missions they would perform together. He knew this was an eternal union that would forever change the world. Tears filled his eyes. to be in the presence of this holy goddess, and he was nearly overcome by the spirit as he sensed her true place in the universe as a majestic archangel. End of story.
Right. So I think
So there you go.
couple of thoughts, just quick thoughts, because I need to get back to my report. But
That was longer than I remembered.
The ending about the changing the world, the mission and changing the world, I think that's so this intense desire he's experiencing, and his desire not to lose her. I think all this runs together, right? So he's combining this lust with this mission. And I just think he's completely blinded by this, which brings me into another point that maybe I can conclude with, which is there's some interesting research. There's a lot of interesting research showing that one of the best ways to radicalize someone is love. And we talked about that a little bit with Lori in our podcast. But this is interesting to me because I think it also suggests that Chad is being more radicalized because of love. So I'm actually seeing that both of them, like Chad's fantasy is so intense here, and his desire for this, this illusory fantasy of love is so intense for him that I think he's willing to go to any lengths to achieve it or to maintain it.
He said that in there. He said, to feel this love just once in my life.
Right. But I think that with Lori, there's no doubt in my mind that she's radicalized to a greater extent because of love. But now I think Chad is probably more radical. Whatever his beliefs are radical enough, but I think he's willing to go even further and become even more radical after hearing this story because of this fantasy and because of his perceptions of love, which are completely unrealistic and not rooted in anything real.
Right.
So I think, my final thoughts would be the relationship between radicalization and love is intense, and you see it here, and you see how far they're willing to go because of that.
Thanks. I still don't know if it answers the question of what Lori saw in him. I guess just the fangirling book author, because he was speaking at preparing the people, so he was important.
This is all a manipulation. Like he's worried that she's going to reject him, so he's like testing the waters repeatedly. Right. He's giving her blessings back in October, November when they first meet, and he's doing like the pendulum thing, and like he's testing the water with her. And then in July, when he writes this after Charles is murdered, this is also a manipulation, right? He's reinforcing everything with this.
Right. He's
going back and reinforcing the message. And eventually, in 2 months after he writes this, she's moving to Rexburg.
Right.
So this is like this is a precursor to her coming to Rexburg.
It wasn't even 2 months. This was like when she was moving. This was because
I thought she moved in. Oh, she moved in July.
She had just killed Charles.
Right.
And she moved shortly after.
Like August, right? Or September.
It was shortly after.
So this is.
She didn't wait long after Charles died.
This is also a manipulation because he's reinforcing that initial message. He's seeing if she's still on board. And then I think the kids are totally expendable. Once she gets to Rexburg and he understands he has complete power over her, and she buys into his mission or vision or whatever we want to call it, he's willing to see if she'll make the ultimate sacrifice with her children so that she can be with him, so that the kids aren't obstacles to him, and so that he can lead this life, this fantasy life, supposedly with her, unimpeded by any children or any types of things that could interfere with their relationship.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think that the Daybell kids heard this, they'd still believe that it was an emotional affair?
Probably, but I mean, I don't imagine they would read that, but yeah, that would be interesting to see how they would react to it.
I also just want to throw this out. I find it fascinating that these two are married to other spouses, having an affair, and they're like undressing each other, but it really does seem like they didn't have sex until they were like legally married. And I find that fascinating too. Like they're they're full on having an affair, and I think that might actually be real now that they like waited for like intercourse until after they were married. So it's just, to me, that's mind blowing about their whole morality, their skewed morality. Like, you'll have affairs and, you know, kill your spouses and kill your children, but you won't have sex before
Right,
you're
but
married.
it's also evidence of how they adhere to the Mormon belief system, right? It's
True.
also,
It's very religious.
it's also evidence of belief too, right? But yeah, that's true. Like they'll throw morality out when it's inconvenient, but there's certain areas where they'll cling to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, there's a little,
not long. It's not little, it's long.
it was, I am so sorry. I really did not know it was that long. I read it, and so it didn't seem that long.
Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. This was meant to be a snack, but I think it's more like a dinner now. So Lauren has read that previously, but I now am very familiar with the
love story.
The love story. And hopefully you guys benefited or learned from this, or at least listened to it, I guess. And thank you guys for being so supportive. We really, really appreciate our Patreon members.
Yes, thank you so much. And let's never get the scientific phenomenon of Loin Fire.
Yeah, I'll have to do some more research on that.
Okay, thanks. See ya.
Good night.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that I really haven't done a lot more research on Loin Fire since that moment.
And how are you doing, baby? You doing okay? I know that was a hard second.
Yeah,
read,
you know,
right.
I want to thank Ozzy Tad for pointing out that we're not making fun of what happened in this case. We're making fun of the writing. And the writing in and of itself. A lot of people pointed out how poor the writing is, how simple it is, how cliched it is. I mentioned that. So we're obviously, obviously deeply saddened and upset over what happened in this case and the tragedy, but we're not making fun of that.
Yeah, and it was heavy. You're right. I appreciated that you stopped and we all took a break and a breather and remembered everything. And I hope you're doing okay. It was hard as it kept going to listen.
Yeah, it was harder. It was harder to listen to it this time than it was back then. Maybe because I didn't know what you were going to read, and now I have a sense of what he wrote now. So it's
and it is despicable. It is despicable. I mean, and right, we were also, sometimes feels good to laugh at someone so despicable. But yeah, sometimes it feels good to mock somebody and their writing. But you're right. It's so real. It's so real, and you have to take a breather. You have to take a breather.
Yeah, and I mean, because to you, I think it sinks in at some point that this is real. Like you listen to it, like listening to it in court. I think like this is absurd. This isn't what 50-year-old believes this stuff, right? Or writes this stuff. But I mean, and the answer is a 50-year-old who's divorced from reality. Mm-hmm. A 50-year-old who has no experience dating and no understanding of relationships, right? That's, I think, so when it comes back to that, when I hear it now, I start thinking about this idea of rejection, and I start thinking about attachment issues, that in some ways this goes back. So some of the things I wrote down were that this is regressive, it's infantile, it's childish, it's hyperbole, it's exaggeration, right? It's grandiose. That there's the. But I think a lot of this comes back down with now. We didn't talk about it then, but
yeah, let's talk about it now. 3 years later,
some of this comes down to attachment issues. I think there's insecure attachment here. I talked about that in our initial podcast back in 2020. But I really think that you have someone here there's probably developmental delays, and that's related to the fact that you have probably an insecure attachment style. My guess is it's an anxious, ambivalent attachment style, or maybe disorganized for those who know some of the attachment styles. And that means essentially, so an anxious attachment style is a child that is sort of that it kind of has an approach avoidance
Okay.
stance towards the mother. So there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about relationships, and there's some fear about approaching nurturing figures because there's a fear of rejection, but also there's a need for comfort and there's a need for security. So that attachment style, I think, is sort of what we're seeing with Chad Daybell. That it's an approach that he's you can see it in this text, in the sense that he's worried about rejection, and he says that he's afraid she's out of his league, right? All of those are related to this idea that he's insecure and he's trying to avoid rejection. And so you also have in this letter, but I wrote down that this is kind of a marketing thing. Like he's engaged in impression management here. He's trying to do some marketing to her to convince her that he's this guy.
Right.
Right. And like once he gets her on the hook, then he's home free.
Yeah.
And I mean, but and the way he's doing that, the way he's trying to impress her is with this massive grandiosity. And I mean, most of us, like I saw somebody ask the question, what if I wrote some stuff like that to you? You know? First of all, I don't know if even on my worst day, I'm not sure I could write something like that. But if I did write that to you,
you couldn't.
I couldn't. If I did, I hope you would run, because I mean, first of all, if I wrote something like that, I'd have to be out of my mind. But
I wouldn't be here right now. I would run. Don't you worry.
Right. Yeah. So I think all this runs together, though. The simplicity of this writing, the childish, the childish quality of this writing, the hyperbole, the grandiosity. It's we joked about it kind of fits at that junior high level, like 12 to 14-ish, but really it goes back to much younger ages than that.
Okay.
In other words, like the level of cognition, the level of thinking is much simpler. The way he perceives relationships is more like much younger child, like a 6-year-old.
Right. Okay.
And so like the cognitive level, the sort of the naivete about relationships, and like the kind of the adolescent part, that seems to like it kind of fits into that 12 to 14 year old age range. But I think like the emotional part of this and the childish part, it's much younger than that. It feels to me like this is more like a 6-year-old. Or 6 to 8, somewhere in there. So I mean, it's so unusual, but I mean, again, like you might see this in some 50-year-olds, but they're not murdering people. So that's the difference here is that this had a real world impact.
Right.
That was so tragic.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think those are some of my thoughts now. Also, I would reiterate this idea of radicalization is so important. I didn't reference the work back then, but some of the research I was referring to is there's a book called Radicalization to Terrorism from 2020. It's by Sofia Mashalenko. She's a psychologist who's written a lot about radicalization and how people get radicalized. And she actually wrote a really fascinating book on the psychology of QAnon, and which is probably the best psychological treatment of the QAnon phenomenon. And she talks about this idea of love, or lust in this case, having a profound impact on people and really distorting their perception of reality. And so you can see that. I mentioned that at the end there, but I want to reiterate that because it's so important. And it's important to see that it's the radicalization going on here is mutual. It's not just Chad radicalizing Lori. It's also Lori obviously radicalizing Chad. And I think, and that's where people have brought up this idea of folie à deux as a possible diagnosis. And I think that's very complicated, but there's certainly kind of that, there is some of that here. Kind of this mutual reciprocal influence that's going on, this mutual reciprocal radicalization that pushes them both beyond the realms of, you know, normalcy. It pushes them into this fantasy world that they can't escape from. And I can tell you from working with criminals for many, many years, once people step into that territory of absolute fantasy, and they can't make a distinction between fantasy and reality, when they can't do business with the real world, and there's some propensity towards violence, or there's a lack of empathy, then you've got a potential problem. Then your risk for this type of behavior go up dramatically. So Chad doesn't really have any previous violent history, and nor does Lori. But there have been some violent influences on their thought in the Mormon faith.
What I need?
Thank you, babe. Thank you. This did go longer than we thought, and thank you for your thoughts. I agree. It was heavy listening to it the second time. It was fun and funny for like 30 minutes, then we needed a break. It's terrible. I agree. We needed a break. We had to regroup, and we concluded, and this is evidence in the trial. I want you all to know, when people are asking what the jury's thinking, they're listening. They're hearing this. And yes, this is part of evidence in trial. Not everything has been read, and a lot more will be read on Monday. Some of it, they've had the jury just simply read. Other items are being read to them, and it'll be continuing again. And this will be evidence in the end. Let's all remember that convicts Chad Daybell. I'm fairly certain.
And I think it's important. My guess is, if I had to speculate here, my guess is the jury is experiencing this similar to the way we are.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all of us, but certainly like let's say a normal person that can perceive fantasy from reality to some extent. I mean, we all have illusions to some degree, but for the normal person that, you know, can do business with the real world, they're going to perceive this similarly to us. I think they're going to see this as absurd. They're going to see this as ridiculous to some. I mean, I'm sure some of them are just shaking their heads thinking, what is that? Right? Like, you know, and that I would guess that is not going to be good for Chad Daybell. So even if they can't articulate the psychological elements of this letter, or kind of our discussion, or they can't pull out some of the elements that we're talking about, I think intuitively they're going to grasp the fact that this is way out of the bounds of normality, and that it has a major role or a major impact upon Chad's behaviors and participation in these murders.
I agree with those that say that the jurors will also likely be secondhand embarrassed, just possibly like we were listening to it a second time. Shocked really at what he was saying and doing. Well,
yeah, and to grasp that this is real, when they begin to grasp the fact that this had a huge causal influence upon Chad's behaviors. Right. That's I think once they grasp that's gonna really hit home.
Well, we have a long night ahead of us. We are doing a Q&A. It'll be a little bit briefer, Patreon Gem members. I hope you understand. But we are going to go over to Patreon right now. patreon.com/hidden true crime for a Q&A live stream there. So we better get going. But before I do, this has been light. This has been heavy. This has been both things. But why don't we end on a lighter note? I'm going to share something that our hidden gem, our moderator, actually, Tad, sent us. That I believe it was her boyfriend put together. So after we were on Dateline and we shared the Keith Morrison Sane Loin Fire, and we gave this reading on Patreon, Tad sent us something. So why don't we listen to that and laugh one more time? And we wish all of you mothers a very happy Mother's Day. But why don't we end laughing together before the next week in court starts up very heavy again. Here, just 1 second. Okay, can you see that? Can you see that, John?
What's that?
Can you see? Can you? Oh no, you can't. Okay, hold on.
No, I can't see it.
Let's see.
Doesn't look like you put it up.
Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him and his heart started beating fast.
Lovely.
Lovely. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him and his heart started beating fast.
Lovely.
Lovely. Loin Fire. You will meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever. More than just friends. The emotions they share are not of this world. More than just friends. More than just friends. Loin Fire. Loin Fire, scientific phenomenon. Loin Fire. Loin Fire, scientific phenomenon. Loin Fire. Loin Fire, scientific. Loin Fire. Loin Fire, scientific phenomenon. Loin Fire. Loin Fire.
Do you want me to comment? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Whatever. I guess it's poetic license.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. The scientific phenomenon known as Loin Fire. She truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about. She was a fascinating mystery he wanted to spend the rest of eternity with. Their love truly spanned the universe and eons of time. While the sensation passing between them, roaring into a blazing inferno. They were still fully clothed. Athletic shorts, stunning black top, and tight baby. They were still fully clothed. The top of those was enough, but not too much. She was among the greatest women in the universe.
Is she continuing with aliens somewhere?
Loin Fire. Loin Fire, scientific phenomenon. Loin Fire. Slipped into the back seat. Tight phenomenon. Loin Fire. Then layered separated phenomenon. Loin Fire. Slipped into her bedroom. Creepy. And stood at her bedside. Creepy. Loin Fire.
And with that, we wish all of you a happy Mother's Day, and we'll see our Patreon our Patreon gems over on Patreon in just a couple of minutes. We'll see you guys.
Good night.